Hi, Captain Peter Cutsey with another online briefing. In the last video, we covered normal checklists. In this briefing, we'll cover the non-normal checklist instructions. Most checklists correspond to a light, alert, or other indication. In most cases, the master caution and system annunciator lights also illuminate to indicate a non-normal situation. These lights and alerts and other indications are the cues to select and do the associated checklist. Checklists without a light, alert, or other indication, such as ditching, are called unannunciated checklists. Most unannunciated checklists are in the associated system section. For example, fuel leak engine is in section 12, fuel. Unannunciated checklists with no associated system are in section 0, miscellaneous. All checklists have condition statements. The condition statement briefly describes the situation that caused that light. Let's just have a look. Here's an engine fire or severe damage or separation. Condition: one or more of these occur. Engine fire warning, airframe vibrations with abnormal engine indications, or engine separation. All right. So the condition statement briefly describes the situation that caused the light. So when reading the conditional statements, you would stop at the one that applies right through to the last condition. If the first condition applied, you would stop and then continue down and with the checklist. Some checklists have objective statements. The objective statement briefly describes the expected result of doing the checklist or briefly describes the reason for the steps in the checklist. Checklists can have both memory and reference items. Memory items are critical steps that must be done before reading the checklist. The last memory item is followed by a dashed horizontal line. Here, that dashed line, right here. Reference items are actions to be done while reading the checklist. Some checklists have additional information at the end of the checklist. The additional information provides data the crew may wish to consider. The additional information does not need to be read. That's an option. If your SOPs state that you must, then you will follow your SOPs. Checklists that need a quick response are listed in the Quick Action Index. Let's have a look at the Quick Action Index in the QRH, and here it is here. And it happens to be the very first page. Whether you're using an electronic QRH or whether you're using the actual paper copy. Quick Action Index checklists are listed first. So you saw that. It was on the cover. That's first. Followed by checklists that are not in the Quick Action Index. The titles of a Quick Action Index are printed in bold type. This is the Quick Action Index. Here it is. And everything is in bold. Checklist titles in uppercase, such as auto, brake, disarm, are enunciated by a light. So that's a good way to know it. When the checklist is enunciated or is written in uppercase, it means they're associated by a light. Alert or other indication. Checklist titles in upper and lowercase, a combination such as window damage, are not enunciated. So these three categories are important that you do understand, that your instructor should and will explain these to you before your first non-normal use of the QRH. All right. Non-normal checklist operation. Non-normal checklists start with steps to correct the situation. Needed information for planning the rest of the flight is included. When special items are needed to configure the airplane for landing, the items are included in the deferred items section of the checklist. Flight patterns for some engine out situations are located in the maneuvers chapter and show the sequence of configuration changes. That is, how do you actually fly the airplane before you do the checklist? When do you do memory items? You do memory items when the aircraft is safe and under control and normally above 400 feet. Let's say we're talking about after takeoff, an engine fire or failure, just after V1 or shortly after V1, you would fly the airplane. You would pitch up to 12 to 13 degrees of pitch and then follow the command bars. And a good method is to track the track bar, the track line, I should say, on the nav display, providing your map is correct, which you would have checked before takeoff. That is a technique that works beautifully well to track the center line. All right, we'll talk about that in another video with engine failures or engine malfunctions after V1. While every attempt is made to supply needed non-normal checklists, it is not possible to develop checklists for all conceivable situations. In some smoke, fire, or fume situations, the flight crew may need to move between the smoke, fire, or fumes checklist and the smoke or fumes removal checklist. In some multiple failure situations, the flight crew may need to combine the elements of more than one checklist. Incidentally, smoke or fire, masks on, communicate, point the airplane to a suitable airport, max speed, and call for the checklist. I'm giving you this advice because I've been around flying for over 60 years, and the problems and losses, hull losses and life loss due to fire or smoke were due because decisions weren't made soon enough. Mask on, communicate, point the airplane to a suitable airport, maximum speed, calling for the checklist. And if the checklist isn't complete, if you're in a position to land the airplane and evacuate if necessary. The flight crew may need to move between checklists. We covered that. It should be noted that in determining the safest course of action, troubleshooting, etc., taking steps beyond the published non-normal checklist steps may cause further loss of system function or system failure. Basically, follow the checklist. If there is supplemental information provided by your employer or your airline or your carrier in the company's SOPs, the SOPs will override the checklist. And when I say override, they really will be supplemental information. No company will override what the manufacturer says, how to fly the airplane and how to conduct a checklist. But they may provide additional information that you must follow as standard operating procedures. In any case, you have to use your head. Troubleshooting should only be considered when completion of the published non-normal checklist results in an unacceptable situation. That's called airmanship. We don't hear that word anymore. Airmanship means really covers every element of flying, and involved in that is common sense. Remember, there are some situations where the flight crew must land at the nearest suitable airport. These situations include, but are not limited to, conditions where the non-normal checklist includes the item planned to land at the nearest suitable airport. Fire or smoke continues. Only one AC power source remains, either engine or APU generator. Only one hydraulic system remains. By the way, the standby system is considered a hydraulic system. So you have three, A, B, and standby. Any other situation determined by the flight crew to have a significant adverse effect on safety if the flight is continued. Normally your captain has more experience because that's why he's or she is in the left seat. However, you do things together as a crew. If you notice, the statements by Boeing state flight crew. Okay, do things together. Don't rush, but do things together. Communicate. That's important. Okay. It must be stressed that for smoke that continues or a fire that cannot be positively confirmed to be completely extinguished, the earliest possible descent, landing, and evacuation must be done. History, I'm part of that history, over 60 years, has shown that unless you're on the ground in 18 minutes after a smoke or fire situation, you probably will lose the hull and all lives on board. That's history. It doesn't happen often, but when it has happened, procrastination on the crew's part to make the decision to fly immediately to a suitable airport has been the cause in many cases. If a smoke, fire, or fume situation becomes uncontrollable, the flight crew should consider an immediate landing. Immediate landing implies immediate diversion to a runway. However, in a severe situation, the flight crew could consider an overweight landing. Of course, you use your head. Tailwind landing, an off airport landing, or a ditching. You have to do what's safest, and you will make that decision together as a crew. Checklist directing an engine shutdown must be evaluated by the captain to determine whether an actual shutdown or operation at reduced thrust is the safest course of action. Consideration must be given to the probable effects of running the engine at reduced thrust. This is extremely important, especially on a two-engine airplane. There are no non-normal checklists for the loss of an engine indication or automatic display of the secondary engine indications. Automatic display of secondary engine parameters due to engine oil quantity is for crew awareness and does not require pilot action. Continue normal engine operation unless a limit is exceeded. Non-normal checklists assume the following. It's an assumption that during engine start and before takeoff, the associated non-normal checklist is done. If a non-normal situation is identified. After completion of the checklist, the Dispatch Deviations Guide, DDG, or operator equivalent is consulted to determine if minimum equipment list dispatch relief is available. As a general rule, your MEL applies once you are on the ground before takeoff. Once you're airborne, the situation is different. If the master caution and system annunciator lights illuminate, all related amber lights are reviewed to assist in recognizing the cause of the alert. All alerts are silenced and the master caution system is reset by the flight crew as soon as the case of the alert is recognized. The emergency position of the oxygen regulator is used when needed to supply positive pressure in the masks and goggles to remove contaminants. The The 100% position of the oxygen regulator is used when positive pressure is not needed, but contamination of the flight deck air exists. Circuit breakers, very important. Disregard these particular aircraft types. We're just talking generally. In flight, reset of a tripped circuit breaker is not recommended, and that's important. However, if a tripped circuit breaker may be reset once only after a short cooling period, approximately 2 minutes, if, in the judgment of the captain, the situation results from the circuit breaker trip has a significant adverse effect on safety. Well, that's common sense. So you generally don't do it. Maintenance, and you may want to check with maintenance. But in any case, the captain has the final say if, in his judgment or her judgment, the situation could have an adverse effect on safety. Normally 2 minutes cooling if that decision was made. Flight crew cycling or pulling and resetting of a circuit breaker to clear a non-normal condition is not recommended unless directed by a non-normal checklist. The reason why I'm reading this to you is it's so important that you follow what the aircraft manufacturer states. And it's all in the book. You don't do your own thing. You follow the procedures explicitly. That's why this chapter is of most importance. After engine start and before takeoff, illumination of a red warning light or amber caution light, an alert, or other indication requires completion of the associated checklist. In certain cases, amber caution lights illuminate during master caution recall to inform the flight crew of the failure of one element in a system with redundant elements. If system operation is maintained by a second element, the amber caution light will extinguish. So that caution light is very smart. It's telling you something, but you have to, after you recognize what it's telling you, you have to reset it so it's ready for something else. If an amber caution light illuminates during master caution recall, but extinguishes after master caution is reset, completion of the associated checklist is not required. That's because it's gone away. It's no longer an issue. Non-normal checklist use. If a checklist or step in a checklist is not applicable to all airplanes, airplane effectivity information is included. Now, you will find that many carriers, I can't say most, but many carriers today use Boeing's OPT, Operational Performance Tool. And that tool, the first step in using the OPT is to select the aircraft type, registration, I should say, initially, which will eliminate all the information that has been used and is in the printed paper copy on board the flight deck. So that actually eliminates the chance of using the wrong references from the specific aircraft ID. Non-normal checklists use starts when the airplane flight path and configuration are correctly established. Non-normal checklist use, let me read that properly, starts when the airplane flight path and configuration are correctly established. One of the basic things in aviation that I learned many years ago is you fly the airplane first. That's the most important. And the pilot flies the airplane. Years ago, we had pilot flying and pilot not flying as the terminology. And we very quickly, well, after 20 or 30 years, I got rid of the term pilot not flying. Pilot monitoring was a much better use, meaning The pilot monitoring is flying the airplane mentally and ready to assist or take over, whatever, especially in an incapacitation. I would like to see future changes of the terminology pilot flying and pilot in standby, as the cabin pressure controllers are. They're two identical controllers. So a pilot in standby is a pilot monitoring. He or she is ready every second of the way. And the tendency when going into sim sessions is when it's your turn to fly, you're really under stress. When it's not your turn to fly as pilot monitoring, you fully relax, and that's wrong. The assessor, your instructor who's there to help you and teach you, should actually strengthen the fact that the pilot monitoring position is even more important than the pilot flying. The pilot flying is focused on flying an airplane with flight controls and trying to do a good job, whereas the pilot monitoring is sitting back and her or his picture is a bigger picture of the full view of what's happening and can be and should be of prime support to the operation. So remember that. That's important. Pilot monitoring, you're the most important person on the flight deck. Gotta be. I was accident free over 65 years of aviation, and that's one of the reasons why. As pilot monitoring, I was right there flying the airplane, and I had good instructors who brought that point home to me all my life. Usually, time is available to assess a situation before corrective action is started. All actions must then be coordinated under the captain's supervision and done in a deliberate, systematic manner. Flight path control must never be compromised. When a non-normal situation occurs, the direction of the pilot flying both crew members do all memory items in their areas of responsibility without delay. The pilot flying calls for the checklist when the flight path is under control, the airplane is not in a critical phase of flight, such as takeoff or landing, and all memory items have been complete. Worst case scenario, right after takeoff, you don't do any memory items until 400 feet and the aircraft is fully under control. 400 feet is just a minimum. If you don't have the aircraft fully under control and it's 800 feet, you still don't do memory items. So the prerequisites are aircraft under control, minimum 400 feet. Then memory items are complete. The pilot monitoring reads aloud the checklist title. Now, so that's when the checklist is called for. Okay, the checklist isn't called for generally until the memory items have been complete, the aircraft is cleaned up, and the navigation part of your operation is satisfied, and the communication part with respect to ATC first, in charge flight attendant second, and normally company third. And that's variable depending on the intensity of the situation. But basically, to keep it simple, you fly the airplane first, you do memory items minimum 400 feet, and you don't do any checklists or call for checklists until you know where you're going, that's navigation, and you get set up to do so, maybe follow an engine out procedure as per the database or as per a written publication, whatever. And then communication, a short communication is done to ETC, and later on you may have to vary of when you do it to the next people involved, which is really your flight attendant in charge, and then to your company. All of that will have variables, but basically fly the airplane, navigate the airplane, communicate, and then take care of your checklist. Okay? The pilot monitoring reads aloud the checklist title. So some people have a procedure of pilot monitoring, actually physically show the checklist to the pilot flying. So the pilot flying can quickly look over and confirm the checklist. So the pilot flying would call for the checklist, let's say checklist engine fire, severe damage, separation. The pilot monitoring, if using an iPad, would take the iPad out of the holder, call up the correct page quickly, show it to the pilot flying, and say, checklist engine fire, separation, severe damage. The pilot flying would confirm and say, go ahead. Or if using the hard copy, which a lot of carriers use, and there are good reasons for using the hard copy, the same thing. So checklist title, that's a technique. And that could be part of a company's SOPs. It's important to know your company's SOP. So the airplane effectivity as needed, well, like I say, if you're using an OPT, you're using the correct, you've identified it when you power it up at the beginning of the flight. As much of the condition statement as needed to verify that the correct checklist has been selected, and as much as the objective statement, if applicable, as needed to understand the expected result of doing the checklist. Now I'm going to stop here and we'll resume the following data in this chapter in the next video so that we don't give you too much at one time. Thank you for watching. If you want an online briefing, as we are in the COVID-19 world, get your partner organized on Zoom, get together, and give me a call. The information is on the screen, and I'll gladly give you an online briefing together, no charge. Why? I want to help, especially in the new world of aviation and how things are going to happen in the future. Thanks again for watching.